Namaskar and a very warm welcome to all of you for this exclusive Bharat Media conversation with me, your host, Dee Zutshi. Today we have a very special treat for you because it's not often that we meet people who have successfully pivoted in their careers and their lifetime and have left a blazing trail in both their fields of choice. So it's going to be a very informational and inspirational conversation today with Mr. Shashi Shekhar Vempati. We will get to know Mr. Vempati very well after our conversation today. But as an introduction, I'll just say that he's a technocrat, a columnist, a digital media maverick, an AI and machine learning expert, and a published author. Not to mention, he was also the CEO of Prasar Bharati. Let's find out how he gets to wear all these hats so successfully. Mr. Shashi Shekhar Vempati, I heartily welcome you to Bharat Media. Namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you for having me. Very happy to join the conversation on Bharat TV.
Thank you so much. Well, Mr. Vempati, I'd like to go chronologically and get started with, tell us something about your younger days, your education, I believe at IIT Mumbai. Tell us a little bit about your interests and aspirations back then.
Very interesting question. So I, my growing up years were an interesting period in modern Indian history, if you look at it, because when I came of age, it was in the 1980s when India had only one television channel, Doordarshan, and it was mostly black and white. I remember when India won the World Cup, we watched it on black and white. And then the subsequent year, of course, you had or probably the year prior, you had the Asian Games.
Asian Games,
first color broadcast, right?
Big turning point.
Big turning point. And then every year since then, 1984 onwards, were tumultuous years in India, right? And we were growing up watching all these events unfold. You had a prime minister who was assassinated. You had immense change that happened, political change that happened in the country. You had the whole Mandal agitation, the Ram Mandir agitation. I remember there was this period where there was so much of uncertainty, and there would be long queues at petrol pumps. The price of petrol just shot up, and the Gulf War broke up, and there was a lot of anxiety that this was just about the time when I was going to finish my schooling and I was going to give my my entrance exams for various engineering colleges. And I recall at that time there was a lot of anxiety that what's going to happen, will the country survive, what's going to happen to the world, there's so much of change that was going on. And then that was the time when I was lucky enough to get to IIT Bombay. And I joined IIT Bombay, the world itself went through a big change. You had the whole collapse of the Soviet Union, and the Germany is united, and then of course a year later, India had this pivotal moment where economic reforms took place, and by the time I finished at IIT Bombay in 1995, I think you started seeing little sprouts of hope that things are going to change, and then so those were my formative years. I mean, those were the events that influenced me growing up, and of course that's perhaps played a role in the path that I took.
That's so fascinating. In a span of just your growing up years, you actually went through the milestones in so-called recent Indian history. That's amazing how so many things happened during just your formative years. I can imagine how that had to have had such an impression on your subsequent career choices. Tell us a little bit about your time at Infosys. I believe that was really the beginning of your career. Tell us a little bit about your time at Infosys, and also how were your years living in the United States?
Yeah, so let me actually rewind it a bit by about a year before I joined Infosys, because my first job was at Engineers India in Delhi.
Okay.
And when I came to Delhi in 1995, I remember India still didn't have public internet at that point in time.
Yes.
And you went to the office to work with an empty desk where you looked at paper and files. So that
Yeah.
was the work environment that I started my career in. And within a year, by '96, India had its first internet service.
Yeah.
And interestingly, my time at EIL was, in fact, played a very pivotal role in taking this path to join Infosys, because I ended up spending a lot of time setting up, internet at EIL, because I was part of a team which was doing, environmental research,
Mm.
and they wanted some software back then in the US, and the only way they figured that they could get access to that piece of software was to download it on something called the internet. And so I had to go figure out,
What is
how to get,
that?
and those days you had 14 kbps modem, and
Yeah.
to download a 1 mbp 1 MB file, it would take forever. So,
Yep.
coming from so that kind of triggered my shift towards information technology and digital, just the beginnings of that whole era. And so within a year I left Engineers India and I joined Infosys, and of course that was the beginning of my so-called tech career. uh,
Mhm.
so Infosys was a very interesting and learning experience, because at that time Indian IT was just about taking off.
Mhm.
The whole world was gripped with what's going to happen with the Y2K problem,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
Indian IT firms were at the forefront of trying to solve the impact of Y2K for various enterprises, corporates across the world.
Yeah.
And the best part about joining Infosys at that point in time was it was still small and it was growing really rapidly.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you learned a lot. You got challenged a
Mhm.
lot, and very early on in my career, I was put into tasks that I
Ah,
mean today it would be very hard for a fresher to to do some of those things that I got to do.
so
So that was the
thrown
best
into
part
the
of
deep end
joining
right
in.
away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I landed in the US in '98, just within a year of starting at Infosys,
Mhm.
and it was in the telecom corridor in Richardson, Texas,
Mhm.
and that was a wonderful learning experience as well, because at that time Nortel, where I was working for Infosys, was going through a huge transformation in terms of their entire telecom product lines, and of
Uh-huh.
course a few years down the road they had their own issues,
Mm.
but it was a very interesting period where you got to see how the changing technology was going to impact different enterprises. And of course it was also a big huge cultural learning experience coming to the US, and experiencing how the world operates, how
Mhm.
different the American society was,
Uh-huh.
how enterprises operated, how innovation was handled, how startups were blooming.
Mm.
So it just opened up my whole thought process.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. How so tell us a little bit about to it so for me that right after Infosys is when you pivoted to public affairs and politics. How did that transformation come about?
Okay. In fact, I get asked that question quite a bit. So I was given my upbringing. I was always exposed to the public debate, so to speak. As a
Mhm.
child, I would read the op-ed columns in the Indian Express. We used to have this assembly at school, and we were required to read out interesting stuff from the newspapers, and I would pick some interesting political topics. So I always had that orientation to begin with. The turning point, I would say, was perhaps 2004, when the Vajpayee government was voted out, and
Mhm.
India was staring at the prospect of a Congress government led by Sonia Gandhi, and so that kind of was a turning point for me personally, that I thought I should start expressing myself. And
Mm.
so I started writing a blog. It was an anonymous blog those days. Blogging had
Mhm.
just kind of taken off,
Uh-huh.
and that blog over the next 3-4 years kind of became a brand in itself, and it attracted quite a bit of an audience, including some fairly prominent political people in India, and so that kind of started this parallel secretive career that I was having with the blog. So there are two things that are going on. So,
Yeah, but so how does, for me, you're still very much a technology guy, and you're moonlighting in this, parallel universe, like you said. How does that, moonlighting then become your main career?
so 2009, when the Lok Sabha elections took place, there was an effort by a lot of people like me from the tech background, who, specifically Rajesh Jain, who was many years my senior at IIT Bombay.
Mm-hmm.
So he pulled together this group called the Friends of BJP, where the whole idea was to bring in professionals, people from the tech industry, people like us,
Mm-hmm.
to somehow influence the political discourse, so that the, the right kind of issues, the right kind of policies are reflected. So that was the beginning of that whole thought process. So he created that group in 2009. That, of course, the BJP lost that election. However, that thought process continued beyond 2009,
Ah,
and Rajesh and I would exchange ideas over the phone, over the internet. And Mr. Modi's office, which used to follow my blog, they kind of got intrigued by this whole idea of creating, some kind of a community around, professionals. And so they asked me that, if I would like to meet him. I was traveling to India, and for some personal matters, and I visited Gandhinagar and met him. And that was a very influential meeting, because it kind of gave me an idea of how the political system actually works. Because before that, I had never met a politician in my life, and never actually been to a government office in that sense. So it was a very eye-opening in terms of his thought process, how he was looking at the country, and the kind of change that he wanted to see in the country. And so after meeting him on my way back from Gandhinagar, I stopped over in Bombay, met Rajesh, and that was when we put together the first from an idea for what would be the digital vehicle for the 2014 elections, a few years down the road.
right.
So that's kind of how it all started to happen, and then I decided to move back to India.
Wow.
Then quit Infosys in 2013 and got involved in the campaign for 2014.
Wow, so fantastic. I mean, so here's a factoid that you told me just now that I wasn't aware of, is that the seeds for the what I consider a very revolutionary digital campaign in 2014 were sown 5 years before it actually happened. So that's very impressive to me. So again, to remind everybody who's watching today, so you just said, part of Prime Minister Modi ji's digital campaign team back in 2014. Tell us a little bit about that experience. And you just said that you were a novice, so to speak, to politics, and this was kind of your first rodeo within that kind of a framework. Tell us a little bit about that experience, and tell us, like I said, I thought that campaign was totally revolutionary in Indian politics. I was watching it, and the use of digital media at the time was unheard of prior to that. So tell me a little bit about that experience for you and from your perspective at the back end, please.
Sure. So to understand, what happened in 2014, one has to actually track how Mr. Modi's, public outreach had changed over the years. If you recall, after the 2002 Gujarat riots, there was this environment where the mainstream media in India was extremely hostile to him.
Correct.
And the little support that he was getting back then was from blogs like mine on the internet.
And not only in India, the rest of the world too, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was someone who, Mr. Modi was someone who appreciated technology and the power of technology, and he incorporated it into his public outreach fairly early. He was one of the first to start live streaming of his speeches on YouTube, way back, even before YouTube was mainstream. He was one of the first to use Twitter and Facebook to make comments. So more than a press release, it was his tweets and his Facebook posts which were perhaps making more news. And it was because the media was anyway not covering him. it was a lot easier for some of us to follow his events and speeches by just following his YouTube channel. That sense, his he understood the power of the digital medium fairly early on. I recall in 2012, he was one of the first to do a Google Hangout in India, and the host was Ajay Devgan, a popular Bollywood actor, and that day the interest was so huge that the YouTube servers crashed in India, and and the hangout had to start almost an hour late because they just couldn't get the traffic under control. Yeah. So that kind of was the background with which the setting was created for 2014. And one of the things that he brought up when we met him was that he said there are a lot of people who are interested to participate in the campaign. They want to contribute in some manner, but these are not your traditional political workers. These are professionals. These are students. These are doctors, lawyers, and so on. And so we need a medium by which they can be engaged. So that kind of was the starting point for creating what was called India 272 as part of the Mission 272 Plus campaign, where we created this online platform where those who wanted to get engaged with this campaign, contribute to it, could do so through the internet, through this platform. It was a volunteer platform. So that was kind of revolutionary in that sense. Of course, he had many other experiments in the run-up to 2014. For example, 3D rallies where holograms were used to do 3D rallies. And he did Chai Pe Charcha, which is again a very interesting use of satellite terminals for interactions across the country. So there are multiple technology-driven experiments that were done during that election, and I think that is perhaps what makes it such a revolutionary digital campaign.
Absolutely, and you're talking about them as experiments. I would say most of them succeeded, and just the sheer level of goodwill that all of that generated. So I would say, in all of my years of watching politics and watching elections, prior to that, politics was so-called a domain for either, like you said, the grassroots political workers affiliated to all the political parties, or politicians themselves. Maybe obviously journalists like me always following it, and a little cream of the intelligentsia, and that's pretty much it. And now you bring into it, like you said, all of the doctors, the entrepreneurs, the business people, the educated literati of the country. That has to be, such a, in my mind, such an innovative thought that, let's take the entire country along and not just keep this in the political realm. Amazing use of technology, and what a great use case in my mind for the use of technology in politics. Amazing.
Absolutely, because it made it easier for a lot of young voters to get involved in the process through a medium that they were all taking to in a big way. Again, recall, this is before the smartphones were ubiquitous. This was before high-speed internet. This was before 4G, right? And so there were a lot of innovations that happened, during this campaign. So I can give you one example. So we realized that while Mr. Modi was streaming his speeches on YouTube, very few had access to high-speed internet to watch those speeches. So one of the innovations was to create an internet radio where the live stream of his speeches can be listened to on audio. And then that became quite popular, right? So a lot of things had to be done back then because what we're taking for granted today didn't exist back then.
Exactly, and develop it very quickly too. Time was definitely a critical factor there as well. Amazing. This is so impressive and totally in my realm of interest. So I could talk about this with you for ages, but let's move on. I'm trying to move the career path along. So the campaign happens. You're part of the digital campaign team very successfully. So how did that lead you to Prasar Bharati?
Right. So one of the things that we had created in the run-up to the campaign was a news website called Niti Central. If you recall, back then, mainstream media was largely hostile and anti-Modi, and there was no balance in the commentary. And so there was an opportunity for internet-based news platform to emerge, and that was Niti Central, and it kind of played that corrective role back then, and it kind of was the one of the pioneers in terms of creating this genre of sort of center-right internet-based commentary from a news analysis standpoint. Now, of course, there are several platforms that have emerged. So Niti Central, once the election was done, one of the debates was, what next for Niti Central. Now, for India 272, Mr. Modi is genius, so he converted the volunteer platform into MyGov. So it became a citizen engagement platform. So there was a clear transition path. And today, MyGov is one of the biggest digital platforms of the government, where millions of people are engaged in all kinds of activities. So what about DT Central? And so there was this debate, and one of the thoughts was, is there a way that I could contribute to the public media? And so I joined the board of Prasar Bharati in 2016 as a part-time member. And then for a year, I was a part-time member on the board. And then 2017, of course, I took over as the CEO.
What a great journey. And I'm sure, growing up, an unanticipated one. I don't know if you ever saw yourself as the CEO of Prasar Bharati. And that's such an interesting twist in the tale. Okay, but now you're at Prasar Bharati, and I'm going to ask you about your book. I'm going to ask you a little bit about Mann Ki Baat a little bit later on. But before that, I want to ask you about your book. The book is titled for our audience, Collective Spirit, Concrete Action, Mann Ki Baat and its Influence on India. We all know about Modi ji's Mann Ki Baat, but you in your book provide a very insightful perspective, according to me, about how the show was more than just a radio program. It's a 30-minute piece once a month, but it's more than just any other, political speech, so to speak. And really, it was an instrument of social change. Please share with us a few of your thoughts that you expound in the book.
Sure. So the book, as you know, came about in the context of the 100th episode of Mann Ki Baat, the monthly program that the Prime Minister does. And as you pointed out, it's more than a radio program. It's perhaps it was India's first visual radio program in that sense, because while it was being broadcast on radio, it would also go on television. It would go on digital with, visuals, putting the monologue or the conversations into perspective.
Multiple languages too.
Yeah, multiple languages. And if you look at across the journey of these 100 episodes, Prime Minister has done quite a bit of innovation in the format itself, right? It started with a monologue. Then, of course, he did the joint broadcast with President Obama fairly early on, by I think the third or the fourth episode. And then he started engaging with citizens in different situations, especially during COVID, when there was so much of uncertainty, so much of apprehension. He was in conversation with frontline workers, nurses, first responders, and so on. So there was a lot of positivity that he was creating through the program. But if you ask me, to put it into perspective, its historical significance, and put it into place it in this larger canvas of modern India. You have Discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru, which is a book which looked at the past. It was a perspective on India which was frozen in time, and it was kind of largely about India's history. Then you have Mann Ki Baat with Prime Minister Modi, which is not frozen in time. It is not looking only at the past. It is looking at the past to draw inspiration. At the same time, it is talking about the future. It is dynamic. It's live. And it's evolving continuously. So in that sense, I would say Mann Ki Baat is kind of the next evolution of Discovery of India, taking full advantage of the modern technology that's available today. And laying out a perspective or providing a window into it, how this new India is shaping up, how India is transforming, so that not just audiences in India, but even global audiences can understand the change that's happening across the country.
Uh-huh. Because, and that's a very interesting point that you bring up, because, again, let's talk about the global part first, and then I'll ask you another question about the local Indian, domestic Indian part. The global part being, India's image in the world for many, many years had just been, snake charmers and third world and all of that, media trope, and or when I say media, I mean multimedia, including films and documentaries, trope from all of that. It really did impact a change in perspective and visualization about what India is and is going towards. Becoming a larger economy, becoming, one of the most critical global markets for multinational companies. All of that, I think, the global perspective definitely shifted. I think that Mann Ki Baat was very, very largely responsible for that. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I can give you one example. Recall, during my early years at Infosys, which is when during the Vajpayee era, whenever any foreign head of state or head of government was visiting in India, the prime minister would ask them to visit Infosys campus in Bangalore. So that was like the mandatory destination. Be it Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, all of them would have to visit the Infosys campus to see the future of India. Now, once you fast forward to the Modi era, and then what he's done with his various initiatives in Mann Ki Baat, you see that visiting heads of state no longer have one destination; they have multiple destinations. He's
Correct.
talking to someone on the Sabarmati riverfront, or he's taking Shinzo Abe to to see the ghats of Varanasi, to do Angarti, right, and so on and so forth. So what Modi has done is basically inspire change at the grassroots level in different parts of India, locate it back in the culture, embrace new technology, and show to the world that what is the potential of how India can potentially change, not in just one region, one city, but different parts of the country.
Multiple, exactly. I mean, the example that I can think of is when I moved to the United States from India back in the 90s, nobody there had heard about the IITs. And, yeah, fine, a lot of, there was a lot of brain drain, a lot of people where IITians were going. Now, when somebody sees, a hiring manager sees IIT on their resume, they don't have to ask any questions. They know the quality and the level of education that comes with that degree. So it's very interesting how that mentality and that information perspective has shifted as well.
Absolutely, and I think today it's not just about Indian talent going abroad. Today, the foreign investors are seeking talent in India to solve problems for them while being in India. So that's, I think, a dramatic shift that has happened.
Exactly. How brilliant. Let's talk, and I told you that we'll talk about the global perspective, and then I did want to ask you a question about the domestic perspective too. We talked about how the Mann Ki Baat was revolutionary and impacted change. Tell us a little bit, you speak about it in your book, regarding how it increased engagement, entrepreneurship, farmers, students, education. Talk to me a little bit about some resource and infrastructural changes that it brought about domestically.
Yeah, I think two areas where the impact of Mann Ki Baat is palpable is be it Swachh Bharat and this whole consciousness around clean environment, clean towns, clean villages, clean pilgrim centers, right? So that entire movement that he created, because Swachh Bharat was something that he was talking about in all his public speeches, public interaction. There were multiple initiatives. But what Mann Ki Baat did was something very different. What it did is that it made it a mass movement, because it took the stories of people who were trying to do, make change in their own, local sphere of influence, and give that story a national platform. And the moment people across India became aware that so and so did something in this part of the country, it not only amplified the efforts within that region, but it inspired others to, why not me, right? Why can't my story be told on Mann Ki Baat? Why don't I do something? Right? So it created that, sort of Me Too effect where, it became a mass movement. And I can give you two examples. One is this gentleman in, I think his name is Rajappa in Kerala, who was completely paralyzed, waist down. He can't walk. He only crawls, and he would go around the backwaters and clear the backwaters of polythene. I mean, that's such an amazing story, and this was
Wow.
featured on Mann Ki Baat, right? And similarly, there is this gentleman who runs this thing called plogging. He's called the Plog Man of India, where you go around picking plastic along roadside while jogging, and I think that became a movement by itself. While the Prime Minister himself doing it in one of his travels to a beach town. So I think that is the clear impact that you see of Mann Ki Baat on one front, which is to do with the environment and cleanliness and so on. The other area where I would say Mann Ki Baat has had a palpable or a measurable impact is on the cultural front, where the Prime Minister talks of the different temples, the different festivals, right? And that has created a awareness and a consciousness in India where for some time there was a period in India where people were a little hesitant to be vocal about their own culture, their own heritage. I see that has gone away now. People are far more proud of who they are, proud of their identity, proud of their heritage, and they're not shy of expressing it. I think that is a big a change that has happened, and I would say Mann Ki Baat played a significant role on that, because every episode he would make sure everything that he spoke about had a cultural connect.
Yeah. What a beautiful way to, without being preachy and without lecturing, inspire an entire country. I have to say that's really amazing. Mr. Vempati, do you have any personal anecdotes that you can share with our audience from your Mann Ki Baat days? Maybe a little inside experience that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I mean, if I can recall, so the Prime Minister is very particular about how the Mann Ki Baat recording happens, and it's a very challenging process because he first does it extempore, and the All India Radio team goes and records it, and then they then have to transcribe it, then translate it into the various languages, and then give the transcript to the video team, the Doordarshan team, who then have to find contextual visuals to go with that transcript, and then overlay all of that. And all of this needs to happen within a span of like 48 hours. Right? So that is, I think, the most challenging aspect of how Mann Ki Baat comes about. So that was a very interesting experience. The other thing I would say is not so much my personal experience, but there were a couple of instances where the Prime Minister has expressed something very deeply personal through Mann Ki Baat, which I think brings out what he had to go through in his formative years. So, for example, during COVID, there was this episode where he's talking about the Diwali and the festivals coming up and the country's in a lockdown. So he says that while all of you are going to celebrate the festivals at your home, don't forget your domestic workers, your helpers, your milkmen, your newspaper boy. Make them a part of that celebration as well. Again, that just tells you how growing up, how he felt, given the humble social background that he came from. Where his mother would work in different homes and so on. So that is one instance. And another instance where someone asked him, people have this habit of bargaining. Please talk about this. It's a very peculiar social idiosyncrasy. And he takes this up and he says that we feel very we feel accomplished when we drive a hard bargain with a small vendor or at a vegetable market or wherever. But he says, why don't you think about what is going on through in his mind, right? That for that vegetable seller or that chai wala, I mean, that is such a traumatic thing that because they make such little money. So think about them before you go on a hard bargain. Again, brings out something very subtle and very personal from his own life experience.
Yep, absolutely. And you reminded me of my personal experience where I don't live in India anymore, but my sister, who still lives in India, she was very impacted by that message. And she used to be somebody who used to pride herself on driving a hard bargain and, feel very accomplished about that. She stopped doing that. She doesn't do that anymore. So every time I've gone and visited her now, I see her, never bargaining with anybody, with the auto rickshaw guy, with the vegetable guy, with the fruit guy. Never, no bargaining anymore. She's like, you know what? I'm in a better situation than them. Let them have it. If they feel like they're, cheating me, that's so be it. That's fine. The money was theirs anyway.
Right.
So there definitely is impact and lasting impact too. Very heartening to see that. Okay, let's move the story along a little bit. Tell me about your DeepTech for Bharat Foundation. I want to segue into your latest technological efforts towards artificial intelligence and machine learning. So tell us a little bit about DeepTech for Bharat Foundation and the work you're doing there.
Sure. So after my term ended at Prasar Bharati, one of the things that I was looking at is how technology is impacting India and of course the world. And one of the things that, in fact, it's a theme even in Mann Ki Baat as well, that the rise of Indian technology startups, right? And there was a time when work would be outsourced to India, which is my time when we started our careers at Infosys.
Right.
Then you went to the next phase where products started emerging, but these were mostly applications where you're building applications on someone else's technology. And now is the phase where you're seeing core technology being built in India. Of course, it's nowhere near what's happening in the United States or China, but there are pockets of brilliance, and there are these green shoots. And one of the challenges that we felt was that a lot of the technology that is getting created abroad, be it in the US or China or anywhere else in Europe, they're missing the Indian context. And there are, India is so diverse, both geographically, economically, culturally, and so on, that you need to understand the Indian context and design these technologies with the Indian context in mind. And especially when I look at large language models and artificial intelligence, a lot of it has been done outside of India without the Indian context. And especially India, given the kind of linguistic diversity that we have, Mann Ki Baat, for example, is broadcast over 40 languages, and All India Radio broadcasts in more than 100 languages and dialects. So that diversity is going to be lost unless we, not only create a digital footprint for that, those languages, but ensure that knowledge assets are created in those languages, and these models are trained in, those knowledge assets. So that was kind of the motivation for doing something where we can bring together startups, policymakers, government bodies, and larger enterprises to look at some of these unique challenges with creating core technology in India and what needs to be done. So that was kind of the genesis of DeepTech for Bharat and the AI for India initiative. So one of the projects, for example, that we've just started is to look at creating a visual AI model for public spaces in India. Where be it for the police, be it for municipal corporations, and so on, because nowadays everyone has a camera, in every corner. Can we, use AI to maybe better manage our public spaces because they're so chaotic in India? So that is one example. There's another example where, in fact, this is something that started during my time at Prasar Bharati, where we had this rich archive repository of Doordarshan and All India Radio in multiple languages over the decades.
Correct.
So we've had a team at IIT Kanpur look at that repository to see how they can build AI models based on that. And so that effort has, so that effort has, now reached a certain stage of maturity, and we are mentoring that team on, how they can create some interesting products out of that technology.
Right. Oh, that is so fascinating. What a great use of archival content for a contextual and a futuristic project. Beautiful. I really love when I see those kinds of connections. Okay, I want to ask you, since I don't usually talk to a lot of AI experts on my show here. Now that I have you, I have a question for you. You were talking about AI being used initially in peripheral technologies and now in core technologies. As a common man, as a person who's watching this show, I know that there are a lot of things that we touch and feel every day that are at the back end manipulated by AI. Um, as a common person, when am I going to see in my face AI? And is that something that's going to happen in the next 5-10 years? And should I be concerned about it?
Well, it's already happening, and to some degree, right? If you look
Mhm.
at the you're using YouTube, there's a lot of intelligence in the kind of recommendations that YouTube is throwing up, right? And
Absolutely.
almost every smartphone platform now has some kind of an assistant which has a voice interface which can interact with you. So there's already AI in your face in that sense with the smart devices.
Mhm.
Take the case of your robotic vacuum cleaners at home, right?
Mm.
They have cameras inbuilt, and
Yeah.
they are trained on recognizing objects. So
Mhm.
there's already AI walking around your home, and you're not even fully aware of it, right? So in
True.
that sense, AI is already there.
Mhm.
Perhaps what you are suggesting is, a certain quantum jump in terms of the degree of intelligence, where
Mhm.
it can think for you, and it
Mhm.
can answer your questions,
Mhm.
make connections that you can't even think about. I think
Mhm.
that perhaps we are probably some time away, but we're
Right.
getting there. I mean, if you look at just the evolution between Chat GPT, 3.5
True.
or 3 when
Yeah.
it was made
Yeah.
public,
Mhm.
to where you are now, I think a significant improvement has happened, and
Mhm.
but of course, it's coming at a huge cost in terms of power and in terms of the kind of compute infrastructure, and which is creating a barrier in terms and a huge gap between these big platforms, which have those billions of dollars to invest,
Mhm.
and the smaller companies. So it is not without its set of challenges.
Mhm.
However, we are seeing the evolution of open source AI,
Yeah.
which maybe to some degree is leveling the field.
Mhm.
Also, the initial hype curve is now kind of hit everyone, and now people are more
It
uh,
is.
uh, uh, what should I say, circumspect about
Right.
where AI is going to have an impact and where it may not have. So
Correct.
there'll be some amount of course correction that is bound to happen. We'll probably have more specialized forms of AI to solve very
Mhm.
specific problems.
True.
Uh, but
True.
uh, but maybe it's not too far away where you may have a fairly super intelligent version of AI, which
Right.
can do all kinds of things, which is almost there. Like I used to give math problems to ChatGPT, and I've
Mhm.
noticed that the same math problem which it couldn't solve 6 months back or a year back, now it is able to solve.
It's
So
doing
there is
it.
improvement.
It's a constant, yeah, it's a constant, process of improvement, I'm sure. I worry about the ethics of it, honestly. For me, a lot of it is, how is that going to be regulated, for example? So I think about that a lot, and how that's going to impact people's lives and legal matters and policy changes, what's going to happen there.
That I think is something which I don't think any of the governments have figured it out fully,
True.
because the pace at which technology is evolving is so rapid
Mhm.
that
Right.
regulatory frameworks are still trying to catch up, and they're still lagging by a wide gap, I would say. So
True.
that's going to be a big challenge. We saw that
Mhm.
during the elections, right? The
Mhm.
amount of deep fake videos, and now deep fake videos have become so common. It's so hard to keep track
Exactly.
of what is real, what is not real. Uh,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
that's a real challenge, and
Yeah.
I think no one country can solve it by itself. I think governments have to come together to collaborate and solve it.
Correct. Oh, for sure, for sure. And you were talking about deep fakes and stuff. How easily that stuff can manipulate people's brains is just,
Yeah,
amazing.
and the kind of political impact it has had. You had a fake video which of the chief of the RSS saying something on reservation, and that
Mm.
entire fake video created a whole false narrative which influenced the outcome in certain pockets. So
Exactly.
So this is the kind of world that we are now heading in.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very important to instill very early in the education system on how to figure out these new technologies and how to figure out what's real from what's fake. And such a long road ahead in my mind for AI and machine learning. Mr. Vempati, we are obviously very close to end of time. So I have just a couple more questions for you. I feel like I've charted a really good career path with you. And I'm sure people that were listening and watching today have been getting a really good idea of your career path and have been understanding your motivations, your aspirations, and learning from your successes. I want to ask you if you have felt inspired and have had role models in your life that you look up to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several role models over the years. I think growing up, Arun Shauri was a role model. He would write theory editorials in the Indian Express, which had a very deep impact on me growing up as a school student. And when I joined Infosys, of course, Mr. Murthy was a very inspirational figure, what he's done with wealth creation. And a lot of the values that he instilled in all of us at Infosys, I think he's a role model. Nandan, of course, for making that transition from private sector to public sector and creating something valuable for the country with technology, I think was a great inspiration and role model for me to do what I'm doing now. So I'm lucky. And then, of course, Rajesh Jain, who I cannot miss mentioning. I think he was a friend, a role model, inspiration. Perhaps if there's one individual who spurred me to make that shift, it would be Rajesh Jain. So I would count him as a role model as well. And of course, there are several others over the years that I've had the good fortune to learn from.
Yeah, what a great again, you said good fortune, and I think it's your good fortune because you are, you have interacted with your role models, you have worked with your role models and learned from them. A lot of times when I ask this question, people will tell me, oh, I read the biography of this person and that inspired me, but they've never met them. And here you are, you've seen them in flesh and blood, you've worked with them, exchanged thoughts with them. What a great way to keep your learning process growing. And
yeah, absolutely. I think you made a very interesting observation. I didn't quite think of it that way. That's all very experiential learning. And this is something I learned even from Mr. Modi during my conversations with him. That because I asked him this question as well, what are your influences or formative things? And he always told me that to him, it was not about any individual or anything. It was always about his experience and learning from those experiences. Very interesting that you pointed out that it's true of mine as well.
but what a great and different way to look at it. I think that's fantastic. Well, Mr. Vempati, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really grateful that you were able to come to our show today and share your experiences with our audience. We are so thankful for your time, and thank you for sharing your experiences with our audience. And to the audience who's watching, hopefully you were inspired with this conversation today. We'll keep bringing you more inspiring conversations like this. Stay tuned with Bharat Media. Namaskar.
Thank you.